Hey everybody, this is Ryan McClanahan with HistoryThroughCards.com. I hope you're all doing very well today and had a great Thanksgiving. And when I came back from my Thanksgiving trip, I found this in my mailbox, and this is a 1958 Parkhurst Tim Horton. And Tim Horton is a player that I've really been looking forward to adding to my collection for quite some time, and he's a little on the expensive side. I'm not gonna lie to you. Sometimes you may get a break and find a Tim Horton card that is rather cheap, and this is what happened with me. So it wasn't all that expensive, but it was still pretty expensive. I have found that Tim Horton's 1953 Parkhurst is relatively cheap. And again, if you really like the 53 Parkhurst set, which I do, it's one of my favorites. Um, you're also going to find that uh, Gordie Howe, his card in that set is not all that expensive. When I say not all that expensive, I mean you can probably pick it up for about maybe 250 to $350, and that's it's a really early Gordie Howe. Um, the thing I found the most with Parkhurst's cards is that they have a lot of toning issues, and it's a little hard to pick up here. Um, and I'll show you guys a better photo of this card. But I do notice that there are some toning issues with this card, and and this is really kind of interesting too. When I'm picking up this card in hand, it's really difficult to l- see the yellow in the in the card here. But now when I'm seeing this card on screen, it's really bright. It's really bright yellow, and I think that's the same case with the 1959 Parkhurst as well. And these cards are notorious for toning, especially around the borders, the corner. Well, there are no borders, but the corners, and they can tone up real easy. And this is particularly true with the 1953, and I think even with the 1954 Parkhurst as well. The backs of these cards, there's nothing that says that they're Parkhurst, and this might be a problem for future generations or people who are just trying to get into vintage hockey. Now, I I really wanted a Tim Horton in my collection, and this is right up there with what I wanted in my collection because I do love this set. It's a great design, I think. Parkhurst has some great issues, and again, the 53 is one of my favorites. But after that, the 1958 is another great issue. Some collectors don't really like Parkhurst's latter sets. I think after like 1954 because they only really deal with two hockey clubs, the Canadians and the Maple Leafs. And I know there was a deal, I think in 1954 or 55, where Parkhurst would only print or distribute Canadian players of the Toronto Maple Leafs and then the Canadians, and then Topps really only issued the American hockey clubs, so which is really too bad. And I'm not entirely sure how that came about. I do have a buddy of mine, Bobby Burrell, who I had on my show. I know he knows a lot about these companies, and I kind of hope to have him on again to talk about Parkhurst in further detail because he's really great. He knows his stuff. But in this case, I really wanted to talk to you today about Tim Horton. And, Tim Horton today is really known for two things. He's one of the 100 greatest hockey players of all time. And that, again, when you look at his statistics and everything that he's achieved on the ice, he's really deserving of that Hall of Fame consideration, and also being the 100 of the greatest hockey players of all time. And then he's also known for his donut shop as too. and that was founded on May 17th, 1964, with Jim Charade, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Usually, I butcher names like it's going out of style, But the company itself has made $3.34 billion. That's pretty impressive, I think. You know, someone's eating a lot of donuts. I've never actually been to a Tim Hortons, but I think at some point I got to check it off my bucket list. And this card was actually a bucket list card for me. I did actually pick up a bunch of hockey. The one thing I've noticed about vintage hockey, post-war hockey, that is that, yeah, maybe even pre-war too. Post-war hockey really does have a great fan following, very loyal. And I, when I first started getting into vintage hockey, I thought it would be a little on the cheaper side, but this is not really the case. Tim Hortons cards are not that cheap, um, and I'll tell you why. And I'm going to read a article about Tim Horton. Unfortunately, he did pass away quite young, in fact. Um, and I'll let the article speak for Tim Horton because I think it's pretty great. And, some people kind of frown on the fact that I do use a lot of Irish sports pages in my telling of who these ball players are. But I have found over the years that uh, the Irish sports page is probably one of the best tributes to a person's life. You can find a lot of information just kind of bundled up in one article instead of me having to go through different articles to try to find all this information. I could just give it to you in one. And so that's what I'm going to do today. If you guys really wanted to start your own hockey collection, I would probably recommend getting into some early Parkhurst cards. The 53 set, for me personally, that was one of my first sets that I started to collect, and the 1954 Topps hockey as well. And I love the Topps hockey set. It's a little expensive, and I don't really see a lot of that set out there in at the shows. And I'm kind of starting to see a little more hockey, but pre-war hockey is always going to be tough. I don't own a whole lot of it myself. I just started really getting back into vintage hockey during the pandemic, starting in 2020. Yeah, 2020. And it's been a wild ride. I do love hockey. I really do. Um, I at one point was pretty good at playing hockey. No longer. Those days are kind of over for me. But I do watch hockey. I always grew up watching the Bruins, and then sometimes if the Bruins weren't on, I'd watch the Hartford Whalers, and I really did enjoy the Hartford Whalers. I kind of wish that Hartford still had a team, but um, Hartford's it's a rough city, and I don't think they could compete much with the broadcasting time with the Boston Bruins. But in this case, I really would have loved to have seen some of these hockey players that I now collect in my vintage collection, and I wanted to kind of bring Tim Horton to you guys and tell you who he is. So here's his story. Tim Horton's tributes. The Ottawa Citizen, February 22nd, 1974. Buffalo Sabres coach Joe Crozier told his team last night, quote, "We can't bring Timmy back. Go to work, get in the playoffs, which he wanted," unquote. Missing from the National Hockey League game against Atlanta Flames was Tim Horton, 44-year-old defenseman who met his death early yesterday morning in a car crash. Quote, "No finer person, teammate, or hockey player has ever lived," unquote. George Armstrong's reaction to the death early Thursday of seemingly indestructible Tim Horton of Buffalo Sabres summed up the emotions of players, officials, and fans who watched the veteran defenseman during his 22 years of pro hockey. Horton died when his $17,000 sports car ran off a highway at high speed and rolled over. Armstrong, who played with Horton through years of great success with Toronto Maple Leafs, said, quote, "In his quiet way, he was an inspiration. He didn't talk much, but when he did, it made sense." Unquote. Common threads through the tributes to Horton were his quiet strength, dedication, and the fact that he was a gentleman. Clarence Campbell, president of the National Hockey League, said the news of Horton's death was a tremendous shock, and what made it so was probably the impression of his apparent indestructibility. Horton, at 44, the second oldest player in the NHL. Gump Worsley of Minnesota North Stars is the oldest at 45. Was thrown from his car when it left Queen Elizabeth Way near here. Police chasing Horton's rear engine sports coupe said they clocked his car at more than 100 miles an hour. Traveling east, Horton's car left the highway in a section where the speed limit is 60 miles per hour, crossed a grassy median about 15 feet wide, rolled over several times, and ended up in the westbound lane. His body was found 123 feet from the wreckage of his car. He was driving alone, the weather was clear, and the highway dry. A nurse at Coroner Peter B. O'Halloran's office in St. Catharines said it hasn't been determined whether there will be an inquest, but it is a bit doubtful. She said Dr. O'Halloran had performed an autopsy and cause of death was multiple injuries. He is survived by his wife, Lori, a former ice show skater, and their four daughters, Jerry, 21, Kim, 18, Kelly, 17, and Tracy, 13. Horton was on his way to Buffalo after visiting his family in Toronto suburb following a Maple Leafs Sabres game. Despite Buffalo's 4-2 loss, Horton was chosen the third star of the game for his defensive play, showing highlights of play on television between the second and third periods. Bob Goldham, a former NHL defenseman, showed clips of Horton in action. He advised youngsters who wanted to learn how to play defense to watch Horton's masterful positional play. Sabres general manager Punch Imlach, who talked Horton out of retirement on several occasions, said the accident was a terrible loss not only to his family and the team, but to the game of hockey. He was one of the greatest defensemen who ever played, an all-star, and it was fitting that he was chosen as one of the three stars in his final game. He was the backbone of our team in Buffalo. He was not only an all-star defenseman, but he was a great person too. King Clancy, Maple Leaf vice president and Horton's coach, both with the Leafs and during his brief minor league career at Pittsburgh, said Horton's death was the greatest shock of my life. Horton was a tremendous competitor, a great person. Nothing was too much, no task too great. There was no ifs, ands, or buts. He did the job, injured or not. He was the strongest skating defenseman in hockey, said Montreal general manager Sam Pollock. That kind of guy everybody wants on his team. He described Horton as one of the cleanest players I ever saw. He used his strength legally. He was never vicious. Campbell said, notwithstanding his tremendous physical development and conditioning, he never used his unusual strength to deliberately injure anyone. I don't remember a single incident in his entire career where he was guilty of intentional violence against another player. Seymour Knox III, president of the Sabres, said, the loss of Tim Horton to the Sabres is nothing in comparison to the loss of Tim Horton to his family and friends, as he was only greater in one thing than being a hockey player, and that was being a fine human being. I've lost a great friend and a great hockey player, said Harold Ballard, president of the Maple Leafs. There was never a stronger player in the league, although he never used it to great excess. Hockey's lost a great competitor. Ballard has ordered all flags at Maple Leaf Gardens, where Horton played for 18 of his 22 years in the league, flown at half-mast until the funeral arrangements for which have not yet been completed. Frank Malovich of Montreal Canadiens, who played for the Leafs with Horton, said he was very, very dedicated, a strong man, a team man. He never changed. The Big M said there was a sameness to Horton in his off-ice pursuits. He was a partner in a string of Tim Horton donut shops. No flash, no polish, all hard work. For the past 4 years, Horton retired annually from hockey, only to be lured back to the game he loved. Following the 1969 season, when Imlach was fired as coach of the Leafs, he quit, saying, "If this team doesn't want Imlach, I guess it doesn't want me. If somebody said they'd double my salary, I might consider it," Horton said. Later, he confessed he had intended to remark it as a joke. Horton eventually signed for the Leafs for $90,000 a year, double his previous salary. He left the Leafs in March 1970 when he was traded to New York Rangers forwards Guy Trottier and Dennis Dupree. He was drafted by Pittsburgh Penguins in June 1971 and then picked up by Buffalo in June 1972. Horton was selected to the NHL's first All-Star team for the first time in 1963-1964 when he was 35 and repeated in 1967-68 and 1968-69. He was a second-team All-Star in 1953-54, 1962-63, and 1966-67. He played on 4 Stanley Cup winners with Toronto, all coached by Imlach, in 1961-62, 62-63, 63-64, and 66-67. Tim Horton made it into the Hall of Fame in 1977, and the thing is, I think that his donut shop has really kind of outshined his career. I've talked to a few people who said that they didn't even know that Tim Horton was a hockey player, and that kind of bothered me a little bit. Um, I know it's not that unusual to go into a shop or shop at a store and not know who the founders of that business is. And this is also true with the cards that are issued by the companies that issue them. Parkhurst went out of business in 1963, and I wasn't even aware who the founders of Parkhurst was until Bobby Burrell told me. And I'm still trying to learn more about this particular business, Parkhurst, because I think there may be some similarities there between Parkhurst and Bowman in the artwork of the cards. And Parkhurst had some great sets, and one of the sets that I think Chris from Stories and Cardboard is trying to complete is a 1954 Parkhurst. I even think that he's trying to complete a 1953 as well. And go over to his channel and check out what he has, because what he's doing is kind of like showing you who these players were, and a lot of them I didn't really even know about, and even the Hall of Famers. Now, in this article, they did talk about a few Hall of Famers that are really not known today. Uh, Malovich, yeah, Frank Malovich is one, and I didn't realize just how great a player he was. And then George Armstrong as well. And I just picked up a few new hockey cards, or I should say vintage hockey cards. And once I get those in, I'll be talking about those players too. And I'll give you just kind of a sneak peek, if you will, on one of them. One of them is a uh, Maple Leafs goalie, and I think that was a big tell right there. I don't want to like kind of mention who he is, but I think you guys know. And I met this man, and I've known him for some time and did some artwork. So when that card comes in, I will definitely show you, and I'll show you the artwork as well. But guys, thank you so much for stopping by and listening to what I have to say. As always, I love to hear what you guys have to say in the comments and start a nice dialogue on either the players or the company or hockey in general or whatever the case may be. I'm usually pretty good at getting back to you guys. So I will talk to you guys later and have a nice day, evening, or whatever. I'll talk to you later. Bye.